All right, George, we're recording.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah. So, hey, this is Gil Contreras, and
And George Holt.
we're doing this special edition of Ride Along Radio. And with so much going on, I just thought it was important for George and I to give our 2 cents about what we've seen. And I really wanted to talk with you, George, about a couple of things. Obviously, I want to talk about the riots. And I'm not even sure I want to call them a riot. I want to call it targeted looting throughout the more affluent
I
area.
thought you were going to say uprising.
No, no, no. It doesn't look like a riot per se to me. They're not just destroying a whole bunch of stuff. It's pretty targeted. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the police response to the quote protest and the looting, because they're two separate groups, two separate things happening simultaneously that law enforcement is having to respond to.
I agree with that, and that's an interesting way to put it, and I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, you're right. I agree with that.
And then, but I think before we get to the riots, I think I want to talk about the case itself of George Floyd, Officer Chauvin, the other officers that were involved in this, and I think that's a good place to start because I, as you know, have been called every name in the book by folks, but mostly police apologists. I've been told that there's not a use of force that Gil doesn't like. And while that may feel correct to people, especially the ride along radio people,
Right.
I'm not sure if they really know, my media background. And this all began years ago with a show called Cop Talk.
Yeah, I remember. Huh? Yeah, I
Right.
popped
And
into you guys one night.
you were a guest on there, and I had several guest hosts with me, guys that you would know. Officer Kent
Sure.
was one of them. Of course, Reginald C. Stewart, Miss Stewart's favorite son.
Favorite son.
He was one of them in those early days, and that was a radio show. It wasn't a podcast. We were on
It was terrestrial radio back then. That's all you had, really.
Yeah, we were 870 AM before it became The Answer, and then it was. Of course, I was at KPFK, where I won my golden mic and did news. And I've always approached media in kind of the same way that I approached investigations, and that is when an incident occurs, I always looked at it like, okay, so this thing happened. So there's some things I want to know. Why did this happen? Who was involved? And what's the motivation? What's the motive? I'm getting an emergency
You get
alert.
that alert, that curfew alert. We got the one from Riverside County about an hour ago.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things we'll talk about in a few moments about the curfews and the efficacy of these things. So I get called a lot of stuff, and especially with regard to this one, because people saw the video of Officer Chauvin with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, and then just have all made the leap to, he put his knee on his neck and he's kept it there for 8 minutes. And I actually hear people using this term even in the news media. I just heard Chief Moore at a press conference put on by Sheriff Alex Villanueva. I just heard Chief Moore call it a homicide, calling it murder. Like, people are saying, we watched George Floyd get murdered by Officer Chauvin in that video.
But just for our audience, those two terms are not interchangeable. And people like to sometimes use them as interchangeable, but you have justifiable homicide. You have, there's legal homicide. When somebody gets executed at San Quentin by a gas chamber, or they get the right old Sparky, that's homicide. It's just justifiable or legal homicide. So murder is always illegal. Homicide is not always illegal. Murder is a subcategory of homicide.
Right. And then, from first degree to second degree to manslaughter and voluntary and involuntary manslaughter. And so, so of course, when I saw the video of Officer Chauvin with his knee on that guy's neck, and the guy saying, I can't breathe, the guy saying, start calling for his mom.
I heard about that part. I couldn't watch the video that long to hear that. I'm glad I didn't hear that, because Yeah, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, and so you know, I thought back to the times when I had to use force. I thought back to the times when we held people to the ground like that, or we had to tussle with people. And so, rather than have an emotional response to the video that I was watching, there was a couple of things I wanted to know because I saw that almost immediately. A lot of officers and officers that you and I both know,
Yeah.
and followers of the Ride Along Radio Show, almost, you know, immediately were condemning the officers and condemning their action. And some of them were referring to them as killers. Some of them were.
People who don't normally take that approach, by the way.
That's right. You don't
Yeah.
generally see officers jump on a bandwagon like that.
Right.
And I was a little bit surprised to see it, quite frankly, because as a trained investigator, I looked at it and I thought, okay, so there's a couple things I want to know before I call this guy a murderer. There's a couple things that I want to. My initial reaction is, well, I think that's a good place to start. My initial reaction was, why does that guy have his knee on that guy's neck for so long?
Right.
What is the reason? What's going to be the articulable reason this officer is going to put into a report and later testify to under oath about why he had his knee there for that amount of time? Because I can't explain it. I don't know why he did that, and only he knows why he did it.
Right.
And so, getting another alert, standby.
But you know, even for watching the video for the period of time I did, which is not the entirety of the video, I don't know, what is it, 7 or 8 minutes or something like that. Even with that, I still, in the period of time I watched it, I wondered why he had his knee on the man's neck
Right.
for that long. Even, and I didn't watch the whole thing, you see. And so it went on for several minutes after I stopped watching it. And to know that he had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time, I just felt like, first of all, he was not fighting at the time. And you're supposed to apply those kinds of control holds when somebody is resisting and actively resisting. Now there's a difference between actively resisting and merely being non-compliant.
Right.
We've seen people go straight as a board, and to try not to get put in that back of that seat of that police car, they go stiff.
Right.
That's not compliance if it's not active resistance.
And the other video that came out a couple days later, that's what you see. You see him kind of stiffening up like this.
Right. Like I don't want to get in the back of the car. I'm claustrophobic, etc.
Right. So the actions up to taking him down to the ground, those are all reasonable to me.
Right. That's just how it goes.
Right. Getting him hooked up, that's all reasonable to me. Now, when it comes to holding the guy down like that, at this point in time, and I was just having a conversation with one of our cop friends yesterday about this. At this point in time, I am not able to say, I do not have enough facts to know whether that decision to hold that guy in place for that long by 3 officers, not just Chauvin, but there was 2 other officers further down.
Let's talk about the reverse angle in a minute.
Right. So I don't know why they all collectively decided, or Chauvin decided, because later, as time went on, one of the other officers, whose name is Lane, if you read the what do you call it, the ME report, he asked, "Do you want to parole this guy on his side?" Chauvin says no. He says, "Well, I'm kind of concerned about excited delirium," and then he said, "The guy's not really moving," and so Chauvin, and he looks like he was the senior officer at the scene there.
Right.
Like he's the oldest guy. So he says, "No, we're just going to keep him right where he is," and they decided they're going to keep him there until the paramedics got there. So at this point, I don't know why that decision was made. I don't know why Chauvin made that decision. Obviously, it wasn't a good decision. But clearly, if you read the ME's report, I came to find out that, number one, the knee on the neck is actually in policy for that department.
Right.
And number two, positional asphyxiation has been debunked, and that
was news to me when you told me that earlier today. That was news to me.
Right. And so,
can you explain that for the viewers, what positional asphyxia is and how it got to be debunked?
So positional asphyxiation was a term that was created in response to a case called Price v. County of San Diego. Sheriff's Department down there responded to a 5150 kind of call, And the guy, acted funny. They let him get in his car and drive away. After he drives away, he's driving kind of erratically, so they decide to stop him, make second contact with him. During the second contact, they get into a fight with him, and apparently that was a real fight. That wasn't just stiffening up, passive resistance. That was all-out battle. And so they fought with the guy. They got him down. They held him down, and they hogtied him. And so the argument of the defense was, because he was hogtied and because the officers were putting the weight on him, that it was positional asphyxiation based on a study. And it's actually on my Facebook page. I actually posted it there. And I want to give Dave Blake the credit, because he's the one who posted it on his page, and I saw it, I read it, and I thought, wow, this really does, because early on, a lot of cops were talking about positional asphyxiation.
Sure, that was drummed into all of us for years.
Right, and the officer is choking that guy, and I saw somebody write, if you put your knee on somebody's carotid for 8 minutes, of course they're going to die, duh. And I was just surprised that cops would say these.
Not on one side.
Right.
You got two carotid arteries. That's not how the neck works.
I was very surprised to see some of the responses from trained cops, about that. And so, but what the Ninth Circuit decided in Price v. San Diego County, what they decided was that there was another study done, and the second study actually confirmed that the first study was the methodology was not tainted, but it wasn't accurate and produced false report. And so the court wasn't accepting it in that case. They decided that positional asphyxiation was a debunked theory.
So it's no longer taught?
Correct. So there's that. And then the other part of it, the argument about the George Floyd case was, people were saying, well, why didn't they do CPR while they were waiting for the paramedics to get there? They have a duty to do that. Right. And in the Ninth Circuit, in the Price case, also decided in their decision, they said that a police officer, even if he is trained in CPR, that he does not have a, quote, duty, close quote, to perform that. That the only thing a police officer has a duty to perform is what they called common. Can you turn that phone off, please? They have a duty to perform what they called common medical procedures. Uh-huh. And so that did not include CPR. So there's
what would that be then? What falls into that?
I don't know, putting a Band-Aid on somebody, wrapping somebody if they're bleeding, putting a bandage on them, just your basic stuff. But they had no duty to actually perform CPR and start doing chest compressions. So those two things are pretty important, because that's kind of why people think or feel, I should say, that George Floyd was killed by Officer Chauvin, because he placed his knee on his neck and he kept it there for 8 minutes, and he asphyxiated him and then failed to do his duty to revive him. And all of that is inaccurate. So at the end of the day, the truth about this case at this point, without the toxicology report, the ME report said that the knee on the neck was not the cause of death, and that the cause of death was actually George Floyd's underlying medical conditions. And so we don't know what the toxicology report's going to say, but if it shows under the influence of a stimulant, that coupled with the underlying medical condition, which were exacerbated by his contact with the police, is what killed him. So,
well, there's a new report though. The family had their own autopsy done.
Right.
And that autopsy is listing the cause of death as homicide by asphyxiation.
Right. So, the thing I want to say about, quote, expert witnesses, close quote, and I don't know if you've ever done it before or not, but whichever side hires the, quote, expert witness,
sure,
they're the side that's right.
Sure.
So I understand the family did that, and it's just standard procedure. And of course, the findings are going to be different than the medical examiner.
But then, it could be argued that the medical examiner for Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is, also had incentive to maybe not come back with a cause of homicide, because who knows, local politics, horse trading, or whatever. There could be pressure there in that direction too.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate, but that's why private autopsies exist.
It's possible, but private autopsies are done when they don't like the results of the real autopsy.
Right.
or the official autopsy, I should
The
say.
official autopsy, right.
Right. When they disagree, well, I don't want his cause of death to be that. I want it to be this. So I'm going to find me a doctor who's going to say that.
Of course.
So,
So, will they list the officer's actions as contributing factors? That's the question, right? When it's all said and done. Now, I understand Mr. Floyd's health conditions, but will they say that the actions the officers took led or contributed in a significant way to his demise? And the fact that they're already in custody and have been charged, well, not they, but Chauvin is in custody and has been charged already, leads me to believe either he made some statements that were that either incriminated himself or were inconsistent with what we saw in video, or there were things that came out of that where the policy is not going to save him, because people don't understand that knee in the neck is in policy. That goes a long way towards shielding him from criminal exposure, because
right,
he was doing what he was trained to do.
that's exactly right. And because of that, uh, uh, if he has an answer for why did you do that for that long, if his answer is quote reasonable close quote, the court has to accept that. And I'm saying I don't know if it was reasonable or not, because I don't know why he did that.
Well, we don't know what he said, right?
Right, that's right. And I tend to think that the reason he was charged so quick was just like the Freddie Gray case. People were calling for heads. You look what you're seeing right behind me, and
Exactly. Look over your shoulder.
yeah, oh yeah. Finally, it's about time he gets out and gets in front of this thing and starts talking to these governors and talking to the American people.
Well,
And
talk to American people too, right? Especially, right?
that's right. Well, like, we can't rely on these governors, and certainly not on these police chiefs, because they've been all over the map and they've been wrong in their approach to all of this. But I want to get back to the case. So as I look at it now, with the information that I have, the ME report, the early arrest, just because somebody's arrested early it means absolutely nothing. And it really looks politically motivated to me. When you rush to judgment like that, uh, all you do is you make the case harder for the detective. I think they're going to have a very difficult time. I
Well, here's
think.
the other thing, though. There were other people who got interviewed. It wasn't just Officer Chauvin. I guarantee you, those other 3 officers who've been terminated, they got interviewed too.
I'm
And so,
I'm
what
sure
did
they did.
say? What was the conversation amongst them? You see what I mean? There may be
Right.
some things that were said in those conversations that they said, okay, yeah, there's criminal culpability there. Go ahead and hook him up. So, I mean, it's really early to say that it was legit or not legit, but the video looks bad. And I'm not surprised that he's been arrested.
The video looks bad. I'm not surprised he was arrested either, however, for political reasons, to try to appease people. But at the end of the day, as far as I can tell, as a trained investigator, as far as I can tell, there's no crime committed yet. And Officer Chauvin his actions may have contributed to the death. And I think the final report from the ME will say that. I don't think it will say contributed greatly or anything like that. I would just say it was a contributing factor, because that's how it looks. And based on his toxicology report, that'll be the decision about how high up the ladder do you go: involuntary, voluntary manslaughter, murder,
Right.
whatever. And so, but I think at the end of the day, Officer Chauvin is going to get, he'll get convicted of something. I don't think they can let that guy
He's
go.
going to jail, man. They're not going to let it go. He's going to prison.
And it's not going to be for a very long time. And it's certainly not going to appease these people who are, looting in the streets, and who is a separate group actually from the protesters who are actually out there,
Right.
protesting.
In some cases, trying to stop the looters.
Correct. That's correct. And so I thought it was important for us to give put this information out there, and to put it to the Ride Along Radio audience, because this was the whole purpose of Ride Along Radio, was to be able to break down an incident that has become high profile in the media, and then say, however, from a law enforcement perspective, here's what the deal is, despite how you might feel about the video that you saw. So I don't know. That's my initial impression of the video and the case as it stands right now. I see no crime at this time. I see Chauvin possibly charged or convicted of some sort of manslaughter, whatever the law says out there. And I don't see any charges against the other 3 officers.
Well, again, depending on what was said, right? Here's the other thing. People say, oh, they fired them. Like, this happened Monday, And I think what, Tuesday or Wednesday, they said, oh, those guys are fired. And then
Yeah.
like Thursday, they said he's arrested. I don't know how they do things in Minnesota, but in California, unless that police officer is a new police officer who's still on probation with his agency, you can't just fire a police officer, hand him a piece of paper, hand him a pink slip, and tell them you're gone.
Right.
There are steps involved in that. There's due process, and this is law. This isn't department policy. This is state law that says there are steps to that. There's everything from your Skelly hearing to all the other things you have, you know, your IA interviews, all this other stuff, right? And a Skelly hearing doesn't happen immediately. A Skelly hearing, you know, would happen a week or so later because it's a very formal process and there's attorneys involved and the chief of police or the designee involved. And it's a big deal. So,
and I want to add also that, you know, at the time, the police have a union, they have representatives.
right.
And when my partner and I, Scooby-Doo, when we became involved in an officer-involved shooting in November of 1987, our attorneys were called. They met us in the field, for God's sakes.
Right. Oh, sure.
They came out and said, okay, here's what's going to happen. Here's what you're going to say. Here's what you can say. Here's what, you know, they're going to ask you this. You're going to
Here's what you have to say to who. Because there's two investigations that go on, the administrative investigation and the criminal investigation, and the two aren't supposed to cross.
Right.
You know?
So me and my partner never talked to the DA's investigator, the rollout team. We never did talk to them, but I did talk to the homicide investigator from the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
You know, and
well, he's doing the criminal though. And
that's correct. That's correct.
He's doing the admin.
But you know, when he came in, he came in and he talked to my partner and I, and he told us, he said, you know, I've been out there. I have an initial idea about what happened, and in a moment, I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to refuse to answer, and I'm going to go back out to the crime scene. I'm going to do my investigation, and then you guys, your attorneys, are right outside the door. So when I walk out, they'll walk in, and
exactly.
that'll be our contact.
And then people look at that and go, well, how can you refuse to answer? Because you cannot be compelled to give up information against yourself in a criminal investigation. Now, when the police department comes in and says, we're going to ask you questions, your department doing the internal investigation, yeah, you got to tell. You got to talk.
Right.
And you can be fired if you do not talk at that point. But that's the two investigations that we're talking about. The criminal investigation conducted by whoever investigating you discharging your firearm in their jurisdiction, and then the administrative to see if you followed your department policies.
Right.
One for the law, one for policy, two separate investigations.
Right. And that's why LAPD has a whole force investigation division. You know, they have force investigators. That's all they do, because in a big city like this, you know, police work is ugly. It's ugly work, man.
Yeah.
You know, and Joseph Wamba once called it, you know, hours of boredom marked by moments of stark terror.
Yep.
And I agree with that. And so in those moments when it's those moments of stark terror, when, you know, in those moments when you earn your money, in those moments when you're looking down the barrel of a shotgun at a guy with a baseball bat and making a decision whether to kill that guy or not.
Right.
You know, in that moment, you know, everything, that's where the payoff comes. In your training, your background, your disposition, and your willingness to think. You know, I just had this discussion with my daughter on Saturday. She's, you know, we're talking about the incident at 105th and Compton where I faced a guy with a baseball bat, and it was probably the closest I ever came to killing anybody on the street. And I told her, she said, Dad, in that moment, what did you think when you saw the guy and yelling, "I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you"? And I had told her, you know, the first thoughts, and they happened in a flash, but the first thoughts were my academy training. Believe it or not, my academy training. Check your background. I look past the suspect. Background was solid. And then the next thing is what I'm about to do, and I'm looking at him. I already have a round in the chamber. I'm looking at him, my fingers, you know, ready to go. And the other thought was, is what I'm about to do legal? And at the time, in that moment, I thought, he's a threat to me here, but the moment there's forward motion, that's the threat to my life.
Right.
That's when I'm going to pull the trigger.
Right.
And I, you know, thank God, I don't know, a guardian angel, his, mine, the Lord, Jesus, I don't know what it was, but as going through all this in my head, as I'm looking at him over the barrel of my shotgun, I actually said this to myself, this is my guy. This is him. This is the guy that I kill in the line of duty, standing right in front of me, right here, right now.
This is how it goes down.
That's
Yeah.
right. And you know what, George? I was not afraid. I was not going to hesitate. I knew that I was going to blast that guy right in his chest with a 12 gauge round. I knew I was going to do it, and I knew that if he gave me the forward motion, it was going to be legal, and I would have to live with it.
You know what, Gil? He probably knew too, because I know the guy you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I dealt with him a few times. He was a veteran, had been in the Marine Corps as an artillery guy.
That's
I
right.
remember having a conversation with him about it one day.
Vietnam vet.
Yep. And that guy was, he was a guy who had mental problems, to be sure, but he wasn't an idiot. And so he probably saw in your eyes that you were getting ready to do it. He believed that you were getting ready to do it. And something kicked in and told him, yeah, not today. He's not playing.
Because I'll tell you, his face went from snarling, yelling at me, "I'm going to kill you! I'm going to kill you!" And it's, I could hear people behind me. They sounded far away, but
right.
I could hear him saying, "He gonna kill you, Red! He gonna kill you!" And a second car pulled up on my right hand side, and it was Diana Chumley and Chris Sanford.
Oh, Chumley.
They pulled up on my right side, and I was with Eddie Cole. Eddie Cole was driving. I was the passenger. I jumped out with a gauge.
Yeah.
The call we got was 415 gang fight, 105 in Compton, and we got there. We see this big dude in a white T-shirt swinging a baseball bat around, chasing people.
Yeah.
And so we thought, well, there he is. We drove right at him, jumped the curb. Eddie drove right at him, and he backed up, and then he took this position, and the rest, went down like it did. Yeah. But it's so funny because I remember looking at the guy, having all these thoughts that I just told you, and Diana Chumley gets out of the car, pulls her gun, and is pointing over the driver door of her vehicle. And I could hear her voice, and I swear to God, it just sounded so funny to me. Because all I could hear was, "Drop the bat, drop the bat." Right. And in those moments of crisis when all your senses are moving 100 miles an hour, it's odd to me now that in that moment, that's what I heard, and it actually struck me as funny. Like, I couldn't believe that's how she sounded to me. I'm sure she didn't actually sound like that.
Right.
But my audio was, it was modified. What I was hearing.
Right, auditory exclusion.
Correct.
Well, but that's the very reason they have in cockpits of fighter planes, there's a warning system that tells pilots to pull up. Right. If they get disoriented and they start heading toward the ground too quickly, there's an automated voice kicks in. They call her Bitchin' Betty. And she says, pull up. And the reason they use a woman's voice is because in times of stress, for some reason, men, and fighter pilots are overwhelmingly male still today, react and can pick up the sound of a woman's voice, even under stress, even under auditory exclusion, etc. So it's no coincidence that there was a female officer's voice that you heard, because there's been studies on it.
That's interesting, because I never heard my partner, who was just on the other side of the car.
He's got a louder voice.
I never heard Chris Sanford.
Right.
But I heard Diana's little squeaky of a little voice.
Yeah, I'm telling you, something about it, man. It's something about the way we're wired.
But I'll tell you, whatever it was that came over him in that moment, his face just went from snarling to confusion. It just dropped. His face just dropped. And he looked confused to me. And I'm looking at him, and then he just dropped the bat. He just dropped it. And I went from shoot to no shoot in a fucking
just like
flash.
That, sure.
In a flash. And this is how it felt to me. I'm looking at the shotgun. I'm having all these thoughts. Drop the bat. I'm looking. I'm ready to pull the trigger, and then he drops the bat, and it felt like this, George. That's how I felt. I felt like I went, whoa.
Don't shoot the dude now, right?
Yeah.
But Gil, you just described the we used to say escalation of force, right? But escalation is in one direction, up.
Correct.
But now we understand that it's a continuum, because you can go up or you can come back, right? And that's what you did. You backed off that escalation. And that's what those officers in Minnesota should have done once George Floyd was no longer fighting, once he was no longer resisting. We should have seen a change in what they were doing based on what he was doing.
That's right. So either in Officer Chauvin, he didn't have that moment
right.
that I did, or he just didn't care. Or he didn't.
That's the thing.
Or he didn't know. He wasn't able to comprehend the seriousness of what the suspect was saying. Because I'll just tell you, in those moments when I've had to help take a person to the ground, get into a fight, take persons to the ground, or multiple people, hold back a crowd. When you're in that situation, you make mistakes.
You can,
You
sure.
say things that you shouldn't say. You say them in a way that you shouldn't say. That's probably not within the policy. but
Right.
it's an area where you can make mistakes, and so I don't know. That's why I said at the beginning, and I'll say it again, that the reason I haven't condemned the officers in the way that I've seen other cops and police chiefs do, the reason I haven't is I don't know why Chauvin did what he did for that long. I just don't know what the answer is to that.
Well, see, and I have to give you credit for that, because you've also said what I see doesn't look good.
Right.
But, and then you go into that. And so for people who say that your default position is that you're always going to apologize or try to cover for the police, I have seen you not do that. This is one of those instances where you say, yeah, this looks bad. Mm-hmm. Having said that, there are pieces to the puzzle that are missing. Okay. That's right. That has to do with your background as an investigator, investigative journalist, etc. But you were willing to say, and did say many times, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. And quite frankly, I was stunned to find out it's in policy. You know.
Yeah, but see, okay, so the knee on the neck is in policy, but is 8 minutes in policy? You know what I mean?
I don't think there's that's where the officer has the discretion, and I think that's what.
Well, yeah, yes.
I think that's where people forget, that the officer has, the officer can only respond to what's unfolding in front of him as it is unfolding.
Right. This is true.
And we can't ask them to do anything more than that.
But in California, see, and this is the problem, is that we cover all these nationwide stories, and we're speaking from a California perspective.
Correct.
But there's a lot of commonality when it comes to police use of force, et cetera, right? In California, the law, so if I was a citizen, Joe Bob, trying to protect my burger store or my burger stand, and I was arresting somebody who was breaking in, I could use the force that was reasonable to detain that person, right? To effect that arrest as a citizen. But a police officer is only supposed to use the minimal force needed to overcome that person's resistance. So the expectation is we have training, we have equipment, we have other people working with us usually. Right. And so we're expected to use the minimal amount of force necessary.
That's right. And I want to also add that in California, the law says you have a duty to comply if you're a citizen.
Okay, well, this is true, but that would be another. It's on right now. The video's up right now on Fox. Right.
Yeah.
That would be on that suspect. It doesn't help. It's not on the officer, right? That's something that applies to the suspect.
That's correct. In terms
of applying to the officer, you're supposed to use a minimal amount of force, which means it was like if I tase somebody, hit somebody with that taser, it gives them a 5-second ride. If the person is no longer fighting me or just not being non-compliant anymore, I will leave the barbs in them. They're still connected up to the taser, so that if they start acting up again, I can re-energize those barbs and take them for another 5-second ride. I can ride that lightning, as we like to say, right?
Right.
But I don't just keep hitting it once the person stops.
Exactly.
I gotta wait for them to resist again, and then I can hit them with the dose of the Edison medicine again, right?
That's right.
But it's not something you continually do. So that's why I say in this case that he stayed in that same position. It could clearly be an issue and something he's going to have to explain. Not why did you do it, but why did you keep doing it?
Why did you do it for so long? That's right.
Right.
And that's the answer that I want. And then I want the toxicology report. And then, based on all of that information, I will be able to better determine about whether I believe that guy should be prosecuted for a crime or not. At this point, as I've said before, based on the information that's publicly available, I just don't see a crime.
Okay.
So let's switch gears, though. So that's the incident itself. But as you can see behind me there, I see smoke, and there are people gathered. And of course, they're back in Santa Monica today. This is apparently in Van Nuys behind me. The quote.
Well, they went back to Van Nuys. They were in Riverside 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, they're all over the place. So I think there's kind of two things happening. One, they're kind of organic. Some are planned. and then it grows kind of organically as people see stuff and say, oh, let me join that. And then the other part is there's no question, and during the press conference that Sheriff Villanueva did today, that all of the chiefs of police and himself acknowledged that there are groups, mobile groups in vehicles who have targeted spots that they have cased out prior to. They all acknowledge that there's these caravans of vehicles with looters, not protesters, who are
Right.
targeting businesses, and they have made a conscious decision to scout out and target affluent areas. You know, that's why I'm not really calling this a riot, because it's not like 92. They're not just destroying everything in their own community. There's nobody shooting at the police. There's nobody shooting at the firefighters as they try to put out those fires. The fires are a distraction, and they're really after high value merchandise. And so the targeted groups, and then you have, in the wake of COVID-19, Governor Newsom decided there's no more bail requirements. Everything's cite and release. Prop 47 legalized theft and narcotics use. AB 109 put everybody out. Yeah, and then they started emptying out the jails to protect them from a dang virus.
Right.
So all these folks are out there
just in time
now.
for the riots.
Yeah, just in time. They're all out there, and every progressive public policy that they ever wanted and couldn't get, they implemented as a result of coronavirus. And now, as a result of the death of George Floyd, we see the criminal element being criminals and taking full advantage of how stressed out the police resources are in almost every little city.
Oh yeah, and that those who are not directly deployed are on alert, and they're probably going to get dragged into some of these cities because it's mutual aid. It's mutual aid time.
Yeah,
so if I work for Manhattan Beach PD, and Santa Monica's got an issue, but Manhattan Beach doesn't, we're probably going to send some officers from Manhattan Beach up to Santa Monica to help. And the same thing at the airport. They got all those cops at the airport right now, and the airport is on alert, but the passenger load is down, flight traffic is down. There's a lot of cops laying loose around the airport right now that are probably going to get pulled by mutual aid to Santa Monica if they haven't already.
Right, and in Santa Monica yesterday, there was Santa Barbara County Sheriffs were out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. That's perfect.
Santa Maria PD. Santa Maria PD was out there in Santa Monica. Of course, the National Guard has, they've been called, and they're here now, and they're deployed throughout the city. Back. I got Randa the dope dog trying to get in the photo here. It may be that area in front of the White House.
It looks like the area in front of the White House. It does. That's where that is, man. That's the White House.
Oh, that's the 405 freeway I'm being told by associate producer Patricia.
AKA Lebu.
Yeah. So I want
human blockade down there. You see
Yep. So I want to talk about police response for a moment. I watched the Chief Reynaud, Santa Monica PD, Chief Luna, Long Beach PD, and Chief Moore, LAPD, all yesterday. And they were being pressed by the media, and I got to hand it to Fox 11, the local. Those guys did excellent coverage. There's field reporters did excellent coverage. Their anchors, Alex Michelson and Christine Devine, they did an excellent job of questioning the politicians, and the bureaucrats like the police chiefs about what we're actually seeing and why weren't we prepared for this.
Right.
And the most interesting thing to me that all these chiefs had to say was they all thought that they had prepared adequately. They had deployed several hundred officers more than they would normally deploy on a Sunday, and they had they planned and hoped for the best. They hoped
nothing to hope.
they hoped that everything would go quietly. They had planned, and their tactics were for a peaceful protest where people come out, speak their mind, and then go home.
We've seen that. But listen. I mean, more often than not, that's what happens, right?
Exactly. But after the first night on Fairfax, the Grove, after that first night in Los Angeles where we saw that, Beverly Hills, Culver City, after that first night, by the second day, okay, you should know, okay, this is a
Yeah,
little
this is
different.
how it's going to go.
Guys
Because
are
then you
driving
have
around.
people who thought it looked like fun, Gil. And so they
Exactly.
figured, hey, let's go down there and get some of that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And you know, vehicles driving around, young people attacking police cars right in front of the police officers. Nobody's doing
Yeah.
anything. People weren't walking out of stores with hands full of merchandise. Police allowing them to go because they don't have enough resources. The police chiefs waited hours to request the National Guard be deployed, and then it took them hours to get ready, and then it took them hours to get here. They didn't even get deployed till today.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, to have, if you saw Long Beach yesterday, for the chief to come on at 8 o'clock at night and say the National Guard is now here. Well, great. Where were they at 4 o'clock in the afternoon where you need them?
Well,
They were
now
nowhere to be seen.
the president is said he's going to mobilize the military now,
That's
not just the National Guard, not just federalizing the National Guard, but like getting our military ready.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to take these cities back. And I'm going to tell you this: when you allow people, the people, whoever is going to be, to take the cities back and shut this nonsense down, it is not going to be pretty.
No, it's not.
It's going to hurt some people's feelings.
No, it's going to hurt some people. Some people are going to, every time this happens, people lose their lives, right? Every time there's a civil unrest in a major city. Right. So it's going to happen this time too. And I just can't imagine that that's what George Floyd, who of course had no idea this was all going to happen. And, this has been going on for so long, but a week ago today, George Floyd was still alive. I mean, today is the day that he died a week ago. It was only 7 days ago.
Right.
So, but this seems like it's been going on for a couple of weeks at this point, doesn't it? Or at least
it seems forever because we're all at home watching this nonsense. It's like a car wreck. I can't take my eyes off of it.
Did you see he made a post about violence in the community? And I don't know when he posted it, but someone posted this. George Floyd put it on his social media a couple of weeks ago, I guess, or something. And the guy was making a lot of sense, and he made a lot of good points. And I just can't imagine that the person who spoke those words would want something like this to be happening allegedly in his name.
Right. And I think, his family did a press conference earlier, and his brother is calling. Yeah. They're calling for this to stop. This is
his brother made a great point.
Not what they wanted.
His brother goes, hey, listen, if I'm not wilding out, if I'm not out here tripping, what are you doing? Right. This is my brother, and I'm not out here tearing stuff up. Yeah. Great point, man. I mean, protest all you want. That's beautiful. It's great. It's American. I encourage
That's right. That's right.
But don't start tearing stuff up.
And, the last thing I want to say about the police response is it made absolutely no sense to me to watch LAPD officers, Long Beach PD officers, Santa Monica officers, sheriffs in all these different cities arresting, quote, protesters, close quote, for curfew violations at 10 o'clock at night when the looters, the criminals, and the arsonists were running free throughout the goddamn county. Way more. And nobody doing one thing about any of it. You had individual officers here and there making arrests and chasing people down. But for the most part, it looked like to me, and maybe I just don't know, but it looked like to me they've been put in stand down mode. They don't want them.
They don't want to incite more violence. The last thing they want to do, I don't know if you saw that in Seattle, where the officer was kneeling on the suspect's neck, and the other officer grabbed his pants leg and pulled his knee off of the suspect's neck and put it on the suspect's shoulder, where it's a much more acceptable place for it to be for an extended period of time.
Right.
So they're very much aware of what's going on out there in the media and in cameras, et cetera. And that's the other component of this, is that those officers, again, as you said, George Floyd, Chauvin was probably the senior officer there, and those guys are looking up to that guy because he's been around, he's been in a bunch of stuff, he knows a lot of stuff they don't know yet. They want to be him. Right. So
I don't know. I don't know that that's true. I don't know if they want to be him, but certainly
I'm saying
if you have less time.
Junior officers look at senior officers like that guy. They want some of the knowledge that guy has, and they want to learn from that guy, especially depending on what the gap is. If he's a 15-year guy and you're a brand new guy, that guy's the incarnation of the second coming, man. He knows what you want to know, right? He's your sensei.
He was 19 years old and had a bunch of beefs apparently, and been in a OIS.
Yeah,
Yeah,
been some bunch of shootings, all that kind of stuff. So they look at that
yeah.
guy and go, man, that's a gunslinger. I'm going to learn from that guy. So they're not going to
Or
tell
if
him
that
don't do that.
or if that guy says, no, let's just keep him right here.
They're
If
not
you're the
going to fight against that.
5 year guy, you're just gonna okay.
Yeah, you figure, hey,
Okay.
he must know something. I don't know, but everybody's responsible to know department policy from day one to your last day on the job. You're still responsible for department policy. But what I was going to say is that you can't let your fellow officers, and Daryl Gates even said this after Rodney King. He said, I don't know why those officers stood there and let their coworkers, let the fellow officers get themselves in that kind of trouble. And you have to be willing to say something if something's wrong. I have one of my dear friends, you know him, he's no longer with us, but he's a guy who, we were chasing a guy one night. Guy was just really not a good guy. Chasing him, finally catches him, and he had fought with officers and everything. And I look up and I see my partner coming toward this guy with his baton raised above his head and fire in his eyes. And this guy was a guy who was very happy-go-lucky guy. Mm-hmm. Very friendly guy. Everybody loved him. He was everybody's, favorite brother on the department. And I had to stop him. I had to physically stand over the suspect who was already in handcuffs and put my hands up for my friend to stop. And he thanked me for it later, because that's something that could have landed him in prison.
Right.
Okay. And that's something that you have to be thinking about, man. And then listen, who wants to get dragged into an IA anyway?
Yeah. Nobody.
What do you want to get dragged into that for? Say something.
Yeah.
Say something.
Officers have to be, I had a similar incident, but I was still on probation. And one of my FTOs who, you have those legends, those guys you're talking about, that you just want to work. Everybody wants to work with that legend in the back of the room.
That guy, yeah.
And then you have the other guys who are their own worst enemy, and everybody knows who they are.
Yes.
And they're like shit magnets. They draw that shit to themselves. And most of the time you just go, well, okay, that's on you, brother. You just kind of step
the guy
away.
who takes a peaceful stop and turns it into a confrontation.
That's right.
Because he's showing up and running his mouth and talking real spicy to people when he doesn't need to.
This guy that I'm talking about almost started a riot in Imperial Courts over a parking ticket. And, luckily there's just as it was about to pop off and everybody came out of the house and started, because we had to manhandle the dude by the car because he was like, what are you not talking about? A black and white happened to come down the street and saw us and, turned the lights on, rushed up. And we ended up having to, get a couple cars out there to get everybody back and sort this mess out. But, that guy had to eventually tell that guy. I had to have a come to Jesus with him and say, look here, man, you cannot put me in that position again. Because if you do, I'm going straight to the watch commander and we're done. This is it. At this point, I don't really care how this goes. I'm on probation. I understand that. But he was a guy that had a reputation for being an Adam Henry, and everybody knew that he was. And later, I had guys come back to me and say, hey, man, you did the right thing because, I didn't go get him in trouble, but, I had backing from the senior guys. But I had backing from the senior guys who said, hey, man.
And you checked them. And that goes a long way toward your rapport with your employees.
Right. So I know where the line is for Gil. For Gil, the line is, I'm not going to prison for anybody. I don't care who this guy thinks he is. I'm not doing it. You want to go, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Okay, I'm not going to question people's tactics. It's their caper. I show up. Everybody's okay. I'm out. But if it's my partner, the guys that I worked with, we never did that. We never did stuff like that. I never had to say to any Scooby, Arona, Eddie Rat, Reggie. I never had to say to any of those guys, hey, man, stop. Don't do that.
Well, because guys know that's bush league. That's
never had to say that. Yeah, that's not how I learned to do police work.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
So listen, I'm going to end this. Thank you for taking time out. I know everybody's busy with riots, and if you've got a security company,
the phone lines are ringing up the hook. Business is booming right now. I'm sitting here fielding calls as we're talking.
I see that. So I'm going to let you get back to business, and I'm going to get back to my pizza here. And,
outstanding. Enjoy.
So I'm going to finish this recording, and then I'm going to send it over to POTUS and see if she'll post it up on the Ride Along Radio Show. I just thought it was important for us to get
Yeah, we
out
got to
there
talk about it, man.
to our audience, and you know, you don't really get the full effect on Facebook. You know, you can get kind of snippy on Facebook, and it's not really who we are, and it's not really what we think, and that's what I
Well,
want
it's
to
not
get across.
intelligent discourse on a professional level like we're doing here, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that's kind of the deal. So you remember Jasmine Canick, who's been on our show
Oh yeah.
a couple of times. So Jasmine has asked me to guest on her show on Friday, also on Morris Media. And I forget the name of her show, but it's going to be on Friday night. And she wants to talk about Black law enforcement officers and how we look at both sides of the coin. And she's got a couple of she's focused on the retirees because we can
You can speak freely.
speak freely. And that's it. That's what I plan on doing. So yeah, those of you who are watching this, tune in to Jazz Mechanic show. I can't remember the name of the show, but it's a new show on Morris Media, and I'll be on there talking with her Friday night.
Cool. Well, for now, thanks for watching this episode, a special edition of the Ride Along Radio Show. I'm Gil Contreras.
I'm George Holt.
And we will see you next time.
All right.